Hey guys, it's Drew again. I wanted to take a little more time this time around to, really dive into steelhead baits and color selection and, talk a little bit more about that. So let's get into it. I already talked about, fishing a jig and shrimp. I had threw in some other colors there just to show, steelhead we've already established steelhead are stupid. They primary colors for crying out loud. There's nothing natural about any of this. But I wanted to dive into a little bit further. I think it can be very confusing showing up to the store and trying to figure out what to buy, what to throw at them. Um, I already talked about um, kind of some of the quintessential steelhead colors. Some of the most famous being like this guy, the egg sucking leech, especially that guy right there, the nightmare, the white, the red, and the black. This guy, the black and white. Um, and then obviously, you've got your pinks and purples, your reds. A lot of people really like whites and, blending colors with whites. But realistically speaking, here, what I kind of like to do when I show up is I like to kind of have some dark colors ready and some of the brighter colors ready. Because I'm not really sure what I'm going to be getting in for. I think that Steelhead, like I said, I think they're pretty dumb. They'll eat primary colors, and by and large, I oftentimes feel that there's not really a rhyme or reason to what they're doing. But kind of my approach is to come in with, some of these darker colors and some of the brighter colors, and I'll just kind of try some for a while, and then if I know there's fish around and I'm not getting bit, then I can always switch. I can go from light to dark or dark to light. And generally speaking, what is nice about these dark colors is that they are visible in, um, I think they kind of have a little more of a natural look, but I also, to be honest with you, you've probably heard some old adage, bright day, bright lure, dark day, dark lure. I don't know that it really matters with steelhead. The nice thing about some of this darker stuff is that it'll create contrast on dark days, but it also can look natural on bright days. But on the same token, I've caught loads of steelhead on hot pink and bright red in the middle of a bright sunny day. So I kind of think about it more in terms of water clarity. So if it's really low visibility, I might gravitate more towards the brighter colors. If it's really clear and low in clear conditions, I might gravitate to more of the darker colors. That's just my personal preference. You kind of got to start somewhere, but you know, uh, your blacks can work on low visibility and your brights can work on high visibility. I don't think it really matters all that much. But back to what I was talking about earlier. So I really like these guys, these hackle jigs for fishing with bait. By themselves, I don't think that they really have a whole lot to offer. They don't really have any of the nice movement like these marabou jigs have. I think the subtlety of the marabou underwater is, some subtle movement is good. But if I'm fishing bait, I like these hackle jigs because they don't get gummed up too bad and they work just fine. So that being said, most of the time if I'm fishing with bait, I'll throw like a jig and shrimp with these guys. But if it was later in the year and you're not doing very good on shrimp, you can always, grab one of these guys and throw a spawn sack or a ball of eggs on there. And, that's perfectly fine too. Some people will even just use a bare jig head with their spawn sacks. So you can totally get away with that. Um, Now, let's switch gears for a second. So, like, if we were talking about fishing in a place that I can't use bait, I really like to gravitate towards these beaded marabou jigs. I think that the motion of the marabou has a positive impact. Um, I think a lot of the fly guys around really enjoy using materials that have a lot of movement. And that being said, I'm not, I don't think these really imitate anything. I guess you could say they might look like a little group of eggs floating down river, but for some reason, I just, I've done pretty good on these fishing where I can't fish bait. Better than I've done those. Those are my preference for fishing with bait. Um, Another option are like these woolly bugger jigs. These guys, once again, I think that they look a little bit different. They, have a little bit of marabou. They have a little bit of hackle. They kind of do a little bit of the best of both worlds, but that's just more for variety, if anything. Realistically speaking, I think you could, if you don't want to use bait, you can. I've caught steelhead early in the season, late in the season on these. Um, there's nothing wrong with fishing a bare jig, but if you can get away with bait, you may catch more fish. I've certainly had that experience quite a few times, but anymore, I don't really enjoy fishing bait, so um, oftentimes. Sorry, real quick, I want to just touch up on size quick. Obviously, so if you get a lot of high dirty water, that might it might be a good idea to size up to like a 1/4 ounce jig, and maybe a little bit of heavier weight or heavier inline weight or egg sinker on your float. And if you are in pretty clear water or low water or slow water, some of these smaller guys I think can be quite a bit more appealing. And so at that point you might be able to get away with a smaller float or at least a smaller jig. So that's kind of why I included some of these guys in here. But I think jigs work really good in clear rivers. I think when rivers kind of blow out or get some color to them, these guys kind of get drowned out, and that's when I might switch to something else. But also, if I think that's also a great case for the jig and shrimp or jig and roe is when you get a lot more color to the water, and um, you just need to you just need that little extra oomph to help them find your bait. Um, but uh, I'm kind of butchering this right now, so I apologize. But I think by and large, a smaller profile in low clear water is good. Bigger profile in dirtier water can be good, and I think that's the added effect of the scent from the shrimp or the roe will help you get a few extra bites. As I go through some of this other stuff, I'm gonna talk about things in terms of low clear water and high dirty water for a bit of the extremes. So bear with me here. Moving on away from jigs, and I kind of briefly touched up on roe. Oftentimes, or it's as long as people have been steelhead fishing, at least with rods and reels, people have obviously used eggs as bait. And in recent decades, it's grown really popular to use beads in place of roe for bait. Beads can be really effective. I included an example here. Generally, if I'm rigging it off of a float, I'm going to tie direct to a straight shanked hook. I'm going to have, 3 fingers in between my bead and my hook, and I'm going to peg it there with one of those pegs. You get two uses out of a peg, so just keep that in mind. And there's Trout Beads supplies these hard beads. That being said, as far as colors go, a good rule of thumb, I think you can pretty much stick to your pinks, your oranges, and your reds. And, I've got varying levels of brightness here, and it is going to take some figuring out on, what they particularly like in your region. Obviously, if you get some blowout, some high dirty water conditions, or you fish more of a coastal river that is, naturally a little bit dirtier, then you can size up and go with a brighter bead. I try and simplify this as much as I can because, realistically, most guys don't like talking about their steelhead secrets, and I can't say blame them, but for the most part, I would recommend if the nice thing about beads is they are no mess and they are really effective. These are probably the only thing that actually makes sense in steelhead fishing, and the reason for that is that salmon and steelhead are super competitive. They get in a competitive breeding mode, and whenever they see, some free eggs floating around, they like to smash them, they like to eat them. They just go crazy. So if you don't want to use roe, but you want to enjoy, that kind of bait, beads work great. Obviously, if you're in dirty water, you can try sizing up. You can try using a bigger bead. You can also, these are hard beads. You can use soft beads. Some people swear that, they hold on longer with soft beads. I personally haven't noticed much of a difference, so I stick to the hard beads myself. But yeah, that's one of the most effective ways to fish without bait. And all of these techniques really work year-round. Some people, prefer certain things at different times of the year, but I think you can absolutely get away with throwing a bead at all times. I think you can absolutely get away with throwing a jig and shrimp at all times. But if you don't want to use roe and you just want something that's not bait but highly effective, I think beads are a good way to go. Especially in, clearer water. Maybe not, they might not work as good as bait in blown out conditions, but that's okay. Something else I need to talk about, and I should clarify that, I have absolutely caught steelhead on, the steelhead worms, but where this shines, this was developed in more of your, Washington and Oregon coastal rivers and glacial fed rivers, rivers that are either a lot dirtier or places where they get a constant supply of rain and are constantly dealing with blown out conditions. And so it, really started out with the pink worm. I think famously most people prefer a white head. And, as you can see, you can really change the contrast by adjusting the head. But the steelhead worms, I think the reason that these work is that paddle tail will catch a lot of water. So in those, small rivers that have a lot of current and tend to be a bit dirtier, I think what'll happen is it'll get up under your float and it'll get a reaction bite out of steelhead. Kind of similarly to how, guys might enjoy fishing a plug or a spoon and high dirty water. I think that is definitely where the steelhead worm shines. That being said, I have caught steelhead on low clear rivers, and I have put other people on steelhead in low clear rivers using steelhead worms. I also know of some people who really enjoy using the micro worms, the little 3-inch or 2-inch steelhead worms in that low clear water. I think these are specifically, I think this is what happened when the Midwest guys kind of took a hold of the steelhead worm idea, and I think they kind of took that idea and ran with it for their adfluvial fish there. So But that being said, I think that you can, get away with using those in clearer, lower, slower, clearer conditions as well. And if you want to use scent on these guys, scent isn't legal in places where you can't use bait. But in places where you can use bait, you can always put some scent on the jig head, or you can pour a little bit of liquid scent in the bag and let the plastic kind of soak it up. So there are absolutely options there. But by and large, just to kind of summarize, if you can use bait, I think that's a really good starting point. I talked about the jig and shrimp or a jig and roe. You can also fish shrimp and roe by themselves under a float with a shorter leader and a bare hook. You can totally get away with that, but generally speaking, if I'm fishing lower, clearer water, I might be sticking more on the jig route, or if I don't want to really use bait and I can get away with it, bead fishing is probably one of my favorites. And then if I can't use bait but or if I don't like using bait and I want to fish in some dirtier, higher water conditions, I will absolutely try throwing on a steelhead worm, and it has worked pretty good for me. Obviously, there is a lot of room all around, whether you're talking about a little for those little clear conditions. If you can't use bait, you can obviously get away with those little worms or those little jigs, but I think for most beginners, I'm going to recommend grab a handful of these and grab a handful of those in a couple colors, whether they're dark or bright. And I'd start with that jig and shrimp since we're moving into fall, and maybe in the winter months you can switch to a jig and roe. If you can get away with it, I think that is. If I can only choose one, that's probably where I'm going for, covering the most conditions. And I hope I've kind of illuminated some of the differences in some of this other stuff. But you can kind of see that there's a lot of similar themes and colors, whether we're talking about jigs or beads or, steelhead worms. So, let me know if you guys have any questions on this. I hope I've kind of cleared things up a little bit for you guys. Long story, I hope I've kind of shared some options for what you can do with bait and without bait under a float. But like I was saying, if you're new to this, I would just start with a jig and shrimp. I'd get some dark colors, I'd get some bright colors, and in low visibility conditions, I would probably throw more the brighter colors, and in conditions that are, a little brighter and a little clearer, I'd stick with the darker colors. I'd start there, and from there I would get some steelhead under my belt. Then I might branch out into some of these other techniques. But anywho, I hope that you guys have. I hope that this clears some things up for you guys. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and drop me a like or whatever if you enjoyed this video. I know it's kind of convoluted, and I hope the overall message is that steelhead are pretty dumb. They'll hit anything, and here's some rules of thumb why you might choose one of these over the other.